And welcome back. We are going to go ahead and dive into how to make an animated background such as this. Now this is just an image that I found online that I was able to go and find and just search up. And you can see there is of course some animated pieces within this image. The whole image itself is not animated, but we do have things such as the sunlight rays here, the waterfalls, the water trickling down these rocks. These are little things that we have that of course just adds another layer to this image to make it a little bit more dynamic and not so static. And this could be something, for example, if I had a character in the video game, he might walk across the front of the screen here. But the background being animated here just adds a little bit more dimension to this world rather than just being a flat and static surface. But how can we go ahead and create something like this? Now we're not going to create something this complex right off the bat, but how can we make something that might be similar? Well, the trick here is let's head over to Photoshop and let's go ahead and start by creating our very first file. And what I want us to start with is by making a brick. It could be, a brick for a wall, house, whatever, but we're going to start with a brick pattern because it's something pretty simple for us to work with. And I'm going to set this up as a 24 by 12 image, and doing that because it's a multiple of 4, so it should give us some nice image to work with. And when I create that and zoom in, you can see that we have this nice brick shape here. And to get started, I'm going to go ahead and choose a color that I think is going to be most representative for that brick. You can choose whatever color you feel is most appropriate. If you want more of a blue, purplish color for your bricks, you can do that. If you want to do more green, that's fine. I think I'm going to go more traditional for my application. I'm going to go something a little bit more in the brown range here. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my paint bucket, my fill bucket right here to go ahead and fill that whole brick in. And what I want to do next is grab my highlight color. So I'm going to go up and desaturate this just a little bit. And switching to my pencil tool, I'm going to go ahead and create a highlight edge here. And then using my eyedropper tool to go back to that original color, I'm then going to pick my desaturation here, or my shadow here, and desaturate that. Grabbing our pencil tool again, we can go ahead and fill this in and create this nice, good start to our brick pattern. And you can see this is taking on a pretty nice shape so far. Now because this is the bottom, I do want this to be a little bit darker, so I'm actually going to go back to this color here, bring it down just a little bit more, and let's go ahead and repaint that bottom here, and change our opacity to about 50% here. And we're going to go ahead and brush in these corners here, just to kind of show where the overlap is here on these two different zones, because again you're going to have some different mixing of the shadows and the light. Alright, now this brick of course is very flat looking here, and if we know anything about bricks in real life, they have a little bit of a texture to them. So we're going to grab our eyedropper tool and grab this color here, keeping ourselves at that 50% opacity here. I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple random dots into this brick here. And then I'm going to switch to the lighter tone here, again keeping at that 50%. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in some spots here around these areas, just so that way we can kind of show some different texture within this brick. And it just, those highlights really help add some breakup points here to this, so it doesn't simply look like a flat surface. And that gives us a nice pattern to work with. Now we are going to bring in a trick that we've done in the past in order to kind of help add even a little bit more texture to this. If you remember when we did our crate, we did something similar here, but we want to go ahead and create a new layer. And on that new layer, I'm going to go ahead and take my opacity. Let's go ahead and bring that up to 100% real quick. Change this back to black. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint in some random black dots. Make sure you're on your new layer, not the original one. And we're just going to go ahead and paint these in here. And then we're going to go ahead and switch this to white. And we're going to go ahead and paint those white squares in here next to the black ones. You can kind of put them wherever you want here. So just as long as they're kind of partnering up here pretty nicely. Right, and now that you have these squares in here, let's go ahead and change this layer from normal in our blend mode to that of overlay. And then we're going to take the opacity level and bring that on down because we don't want it at 100%. We're going to take that a little bit lower here, and you might have to adjust your slider based upon the color that you have. You can take it all the way down to 10%, 20%, whatever color that you feel is going to get you the nicest blend that you can work with is going to be the color that you're going to ultimately choose. And I'm going to go ahead, it looks like about 16% here, looks pretty good, as it helps add some color variation into this brick here. Now, one thing with this brick is that our shadows are currently on this layer here. Even if we ignore this layer, we can see that we have this pretty much solid corners here. It's not a very nice transition between our light and our dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our eyedropper tool, grab the dark color that we had here, and let's just go ahead and kind of paint this in just a little bit to kind of round this corner off here a little bit. And we'll kind of do the same thing over here near the top. And then grab the light color here, and let's go ahead and paint that one in over here as well. Because what we're trying to do is round these corners off just a little bit here so we have a much nicer transition. And I'm going to go ahead and grab some of these mid-tones and these lighter tones here to kind of help round this out. So for example, this is my darker tone here, so I'm going to grab this brown here to kind of help round out those corners. And then for my highlights, I'll do the same thing here. I want these to be kind of some of these lighter tones, so I'm going to kind of try to round some of these corners off here. Alright, now of course I gotta be careful here because I do have a darker corner up here, so I just want to make sure that as I paint this in, this transition seems a little bit more natural. Alright, and that kind of rounded those edges out so it's not quite so abrupt in some of that. Now if I do have something here, like say, hey, this doesn't look quite right, I can always pick a tone and try to paint some of these back in, so that way they look a little bit more natural in some of the transition here. Now one thing we do want is to kind of give a little bit more of a gradual transition between some of these color tones here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the dark tone here and switch back to my pencil tool. We'll drag our opacity down to about 50%. And all we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and paint in some of these zones here. We'll first select one spot, that looks good. Switch to our eyedropper tool, grab that color, brown, and again, we're just going to paint in some of these spots here along these two different sides here. And it's okay if it's not an exact tone shift because again, we're just trying to get some of these filled in. Now over here we have, of course, our lighter colors, so our highlights. So we're going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to select that color, switch to my brush tool. We're again at 50%. And let's go ahead and paint some of these tones in here. So if I paint one in, I can bring that, a trick here, remember, bring this up to 100% now with our eyedropper tool selecting on that new color that we just did. And we of course can paint in this lighter tone. And of course it's just something to help break this up. Again, select, then we paint 1 pixel. And that pixel, oops, I forgot to bring that to 50%, so paint 1 pixel. And then once that 1 pixel is painted, we can then switch back to our eyedropper tool to select that tone. Bring it back up to 100%, and with our brush tool we can now go ahead and paint along this transition here to kind of help add a more natural transition tone between these two edges. Now at this point you're welcome to keep playing around with this brick until you get it to a point where you feel comfortable enough where you can feel that this is a good pattern, but I think for now, for our demonstration purposes, it looks pretty good. So we are at the point where we're ready to start making this into a pattern. Now I can't just simply use this one brick as a pattern because otherwise everything will just look like a stacked brick. Because if you ever think of how bricks are laid, a lot of times they're laid either offset or they're laid in such a way where one is halfway staggered. Either way, let's go ahead and make that staggering pattern here by first merging our two layers that we have right now. So now it's one solid layer. And I'm just going to call this brick. And what I'm going to do to create those other bricks, now currently we only have this one canvas here. We need effectively at least 3 more positions here for this brick to really take effect. So I'm just going to go up to Image, and I'm going to go to Canvas Size. And I'm going to set the anchor to the upper left here. And I'm going to simply double my canvas size. So this before was 24, so I'm going to make that 48. And if the height was 12, I'm going to just double that to 24. And when I click OK and Control 0, you can see that we now have effectively doubled our canvas size here for our brick. So here's our individual brick. Now we of course can do this several different ways. The easiest way to do this is to go to the Move tool, and holding down the Alt key, we get that 2-headed arrow. We can go ahead and drag this over to go ahead and create our second brick. And because these are going to be staggered, I'm going to keep holding down that Alt key, and I'm going to drag a new one down. But I want to kind of center that brick so that way it's split between these. Now, however you center that, remember, it may not be perfectly centered because we have an even number of pixels, but that's okay. Because again, they could also be staggered slightly. So it's more like this, because that's also another one. But we're going to try to center this one a little bit more. That looks pretty good, about 12 pixels each. And then keep holding down that Alt key. We're going to drag another brick, so it's off the side here. And drag our last one so it's off to the side here. There we go. We have ourselves our brick pattern. Now, if you remember, we can go ahead and define this as a pattern that we'll be able to use within our image that we're going to create. So let's define a pattern by going to Edit, and of course we have our Define Pattern option here. Now, you don't have to merge these down to go ahead and create this as a pattern, but I'm going to go ahead and do so. Just so that way it's gone ahead and be done. There's my brick pattern right there. So again, define our image, so define pattern, and I'm just going to call this brick pattern. Click OK. And we can go ahead and save this pattern as well. So brick pattern. And let's go ahead and create a new image to go ahead and put that in. And I'm going to set this up as a image size of 400 pixels wide by 225 pixels high. Make sure that's transparent. Let's click OK. And Control 0 to go ahead and zoom that in a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in the bottom of the canvas here with that brick pattern. So this is going to be effectively the bottom here. And you can, of course, choose a height that you want. But I'm going to go ahead and choose about 24 pixels high simply because that was the height of our brick, if you recall. And let's go ahead and use our paint bucket tool. So our fill bucket, set that to pattern. And if we look, we should have our brick pattern available to us to use here. So I go ahead and paint that pattern in, and there you will see is my brick pattern. Now, one thing you might see here, if I just deselect this real quick, is the top of my brick doesn't look quite white. If you notice, it's got a bit of an edge to it. Now we can go ahead and just use our marquee selection tool here. Let's just zoom this in just a little bit here. And we can go ahead and just use our marquee selection tool just to kind of take off the top of that brick here. So we're just going to select just the top layer there. And all I'm going to do is once that I make sure that's selected, is just tap the delete key on my keyboard, and you can see that we now have trimmed that wall there. Let's see how this looks if I were to put a brick pattern here in the middle of the air. So let's just go ahead and use our marquee selection again. And let's go ahead and create a pattern here for our bricks. Let's go ahead and set this one maybe, it's out 24 pixels high. Let's go ahead and maybe set this one to about 20 pixels high. And again, using our paint bucket tool, we go ahead and fill in with that pattern. And you can see what happens here when we start doing that. We don't end up with necessarily a nice clean pattern here. So if I wanted to have that maybe be a little cleaner, if I go ahead and, for example, make that try 16 pixels, and we just to see what that looks like, you can see how those patterns end up coming out. So it's something just to keep in mind as you work through with these different patterns. So I'm going to go ahead though, and for this purpose, let's go ahead and make this one about, let's see what 28 pixels high looks like. And go ahead and paint that one in. Now that one looks pretty good here. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. Grab my marquee tool. Let's go ahead and trim off the top layer of brick there, because again, that doesn't look quite what we want. And just delete. Now we do have some things here with the bottom of this that I'm going to real quickly kind of show you, and then have you go ahead and patch those in. So what we want to do here, if I just go ahead and zoom this in here just a little bit, we need to go ahead, because this is in the air, kind of take out the bottom corners of this. And then we're going to have to reshade our corners here and kind of round them out, just so this pattern ends up looking a little bit nicer. So that's the challenge I'm going to leave you with. Go ahead and see if you can do that, and I'll see you here at the end and see what yours looks like. And welcome back. Here is my finished brick pattern just for a reference. And you can see that I trimmed in some of those pieces, did a little bit of recoloring here for these upper bricks since this is where the light is coming in. And I hope that yours turned out pretty similar. And when we come back next time, we'll add our next layer of detail here into this image.